Hey everybody, this is the fourth here, and in this video I wanted to take a look at the idea of gluing your sounds together. When people talk about gluing your sounds, they are often going to bring up compression. But in my opinion, there are so many other factors that go into really getting your sounds to really play together well and sound like they are glued together and just sound like they really belong together in that mix. Nothing sounds kind of out of place. And EQ does play a big part in this, at least for my production process. So if you listen to any of my latest mixes, you'll find that while I'm definitely not in the top tier of mixers out there, you'll find that for the most part, all of the sounds within a song really fit together well. They really sound like they belong together. Nothing is really out of place in the context of the mix, and everything just really sounds nice and glued together well. And really, I don't have compression to thank very much for this. It definitely helps in certain areas, but a very big part of it is 1, setting the levels right, and then 2, using EQ to make sure your sounds are balanced in regards to each other and in regards to the mix. And really, this kind of ties in with the previous video, so I'm kind of making this a sub-point of the previous video. Because while you're cleaning and enhancing your sounds, you really want to do it in such a way that it causes the sound to be balanced with the rest of your mix and to feel like it belongs with the rest of your mix. And if you do that right, if you do that properly and really pay attention, that will go a really long way towards gluing the sounds in your mix together, because the frequency balance across all your sounds really fit together in such a way that it just makes sense and they all sound like they belong together. So, this is still kind of, in my mind, a part of the previous video, cleaning, enhancing, and really just shaping your sounds so that they sound good on their own, but even more importantly, they sound like they fit in the mix and they sound good with the rest of the mix. And so in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at one specific case, and this is getting a bass sound to fit in with the rest of the track. And you can hear that it pretty much plays on its own, the bass does in this section. There's nothing else playing in this little break that the bass plays in. So I don't really have a problem getting it to fit in the mix regarding other sounds interfering with it or anything like that. But the frequency balance of the sound is still really important in allowing it to fit in the context of the rest of the mix. And you'll kind of get a better idea of what I mean if I play it. And then if I play it with the EQ turned off. With that EQ turned off, it really sticks out. It really doesn't fit in the mix. It sounds pretty weird and bad. And that frequency balance isn't necessarily wrong for that sound on its own. In a different context, it might sound great like that. But in this particular mix, it really ends up standing out in a negative way. And so you can see that even though it might sound fine on its own, and even though it's not playing simultaneously with any of the other sounds in the mix, that frequency balance is really important in allowing it to be glued into the mix and sit in the mix properly and sound like it belongs in that mix. So if you're trying to mix a certain sound into your track, and you're having some trouble getting it to fit in the mix, even when you're playing around with setting it at different levels, it kind of stands out and it doesn't quite fit, it doesn't quite glue quite right, no matter what level you set it at. You might need to use some EQ to help balance those frequencies in the context of the mix to help it sit right. So I'm going to kind of explain what I did using this EQ in order to help it fit with the rest of the mix. And so when I listen to the sound in the context of the mix, I need to pay attention and find out what kind of is making it stand out too much. And so I'll listen to the mix and I'll listen to that sound and kind of really pay attention. And for me, right away, I hear that it has too much bass and too much kind of mid-range, especially the slightly lower mid-range. And so you can see on the EQ, I started off by reducing the lower bass some, just by high-passing it. And then I also made a pretty big cut on, you'll see when I play it, that frequency right there. That plays really strongly in the space, and the high pass didn't quite get that specific frequency out enough, and if I cut the whole bass more than that, it would have taken out too much. So I just kind of added this little cut here to just tame that harmonic a little bit. And so you'll hear if I turn the other EQ adjustments off, it will sound a bit better, but still not quite right. You can hear that now the bass isn't overwhelming anymore. The bass doesn't stick out, but it still doesn't sound quite right in the mix. I could probably keep it this way and people wouldn't care a whole lot, but it doesn't sound quite right. I want it to sound better than that. So right now, the problem I'm hearing is really that lower mid-range. So what I ended up doing was I made a pretty decent cut in that lower mid-range, and I will play the sound now with just that cut. And you'll hear it sounds quite a bit better. This cut here made a huge difference in that frequency balance, and it pretty much sits quite well in the mix now. And then the last thing I heard that, since it's kind of playing on its own, it needs a little bit more brightness to it, because you can hear the lead sound and the overall mix has a decent brightness to it. But that bass kind of lacks it, and since the bass plays on its own, and it is a harmonic rich bass, I thought that boosting the high end just slightly would help that out and help kind of finish up gluing it into the rest of the mix. And so you can see that essentially I was kind of doing the same thing as I was in the previous video. I was enhancing and cleaning the sound, because you can hear it, it sounds better, it sounds cleaner, even when played on its own. But at the same time, the character, it could sound good either way, but in the context of this specific mix, it sounds much better with that EQ set to how I set it. So in my mind, this really is the same process as I described in the previous video, and the only difference is, you're not paying attention to only how that sound sounds on its own. You're really paying attention to how it sounds regarding the rest of the mix. And, this sound plays completely on its own, so it's a little bit different when sounds play with the rest of the mix. But at the same time, it's the same thought process, and the only difference is you'll probably be listening to other sounds playing. And you might make even more kind of changes to the EQ just to help your other sounds cut through better, or to help avoid muddiness or anything like that. So hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully it gives you an idea of how you can use EQ to balance the frequencies of your sounds so that they really fit in the mix, and so that all the sounds in your mix sound pretty well glued together. Because in my opinion, this is so much more powerful than just compression, which a lot of people say, if you want to glue your sounds together, use compression. But in my opinion, the first step is getting your levels right, and then EQ would be the next step. And phase is somewhere in there as well, but phase is in a much later section of this tutorial. But just EQ alone, you can see how powerful that EQ is in this video. So, hopefully that's helpful. And really what it comes down to is listening very, very carefully, and just a lot of practice, really, training your ears, training yourself to listen for those differences, and training yourself to use the EQ to make the changes that you have to in order to get your frequency balances in such a way that everything sounds like it belongs in that mix and nothing stands out or sounds awkward. So this video just kind of was meant to give you an idea of how you can think about it and one specific example, but what it really comes down to is practice and mixing a bunch of songs to just get used to the process, get used to what you need to listen for and all that.